Today's episode of the Counselling Tutor Podcast is sponsored by Web Healer. You're a counsellor in private practice and you need a website, or you've got an existing website which you need help with. Web Healer are offering Counselling Tutor Podcast listeners, that's you, £100 off the cost of a website design and build. Now, Web Healers specialise in websites for counsellors and psychotherapists. It's what they do. And the Web Healer team provide a completely non-technical, done-for-you solution, leaving you to focus your time on your clients. Operating for 20 years, Web Healer are a trusted resource amongst counsellors when it comes to getting your practice online. So get the package details and claim your £100 off coupon for your new website by going to counsellingtutor.com/website. That's counsellingtutor.com/website.
Hello and welcome to episode 354 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. I'm Rory and my guest today is another familiar voice on the podcast, Ruth Hill. Ruth is an integrative REBT therapist with a background in sports science and psychology, and she's delivered many insightful lectures on cognitive psychology in both our CPD and CSR libraries. Today, she joins us to talk about her latest lecture for the CPD and CSR library, REBT Clear Definitions. This session breaks down the core principles of rational emotive behavioural therapy, making the theory clear, practical and accessible for both trainees and experienced practitioners alike. So with that said, let's roll the intro.
Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for counsellors, psychotherapists and counselling students. Here are your hosts, Rory Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hello and welcome to episode 354 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. My colleague Rory Oakes and myself, Ken Kelly, are delighted to welcome you to our three topics today, starting off with ethical sustainable practice, where today we're going to be looking at the draft BACP Ethical Framework. This has been out for consultation, and that draft is now out, and we're having a look at that and looking at comparing what may have changed. We're then going to practice matters. Rory's already beautifully teed up Ruth Hill, who's going to be speaking about REBT, and that is worth listening to. It really is. REBT, you don't hear a lot about it, but yet it intertwines itself into everyday life so much, the way we behave. And then into student services, I guess we're speaking about navigating personal triggers in counselling training. Happens all the time, happened when I was training, happened when Rory was training. If you're a student and you're training, you probably had a few things that have triggered as you're going through that. How do we navigate that and what can we expect? But we start as always with ethical sustainable practice, where we look about staying ethical and sustainable within our practices. And we cannot ignore, Rory, that the BACP have released their proposed framework, the 2025, let's say it like that. That makes it sound like a date, ethical framework. And this is an update from 2018. And of course, a lot has happened since 2018, Rory. But give us a flavour of what we can expect as we dive in and discuss this.
Yes, so just for a bit of context, because we do have people who are listening to the future who might be listening to the back catalogue as this podcast gets indexed and we move through time. We recorded this in October of 2025, and the British Association of Counselling and Psychotherapy have released a draft ethical framework, an update from the 2018 ethical framework. So, this is the first iteration, I guess, in 7 years, and it's arrived, and they're asking members to consult on it and to give input before it becomes finalised. And looking at the documentation, I think it'll be finalised sometime in the last quarter of 2026 as an actual working document that therapists will work off. But it is a bit of a change, I have to say, Ken. And, as you say, a lot has happened since 2018. And I think it's worth just kind of reminding ourselves, we had the pandemic and the move from working in the room to working online. And that now has become a part of a mixed economy of practice that a lot of therapists use online and both in the room. So that the framework addresses that. Also, it talks a lot about AI. We're living in a world of artificial intelligence, so it reflects on that. And also it reinforces the idea that we cannot get involved in conversion therapy. If someone is gay, it's not our job, or nor should it be, I have to say, to convince them that they're not. And of course, if someone is transgender, the same thing would apply. So it's very, very up to date, and it talks, I think, about real issues that are happening in therapy today, which happens to be the BACP's magazine. I pinched their title,
Smart.
Smart, yes. But it really is talking about real issues, and I have to say, just looking at it, it does feel very, very different to the frameworks I grew up with. In one aspect, it's more focused. It's more focused and clear about what we must do. And I think the other framework said we should and we must. If you look at the framework carefully, it said we should and we must. We should is giving a bit of riddle room and saying, well, we may be able to defend not doing something. We must is non-negotiable. And I've noticed in this framework that there's more we must, Ken. In other words, it's been very clear on what we have to do as therapists and our commitment and our responsibilities to clients.
Yes. Wow. That's a beautiful way to kind of introduce this. And I think there's a lot of nuance in this. We must remember this is a draft ethical framework. An ethical framework is by definition a chunky piece of work that takes a number of readings over to really fully understand it and digest the information. I try to pull some kind of overviews from this, Rory. And it's interesting, we may even differ slightly on our interpretation of this as we go through, Rory, which I think is an interesting one. The overall direction, for me, it felt it was moving away from this rules and compliance. And there's a new theme that I'm recognizing, and it's relationships and collaboration. And this is really interesting because the relationship has come to the heart of the ethical framework. And we've got this central new statement: working ethically is working within relationships. And it's interesting, we've spoken a number of times on this podcast how the relationship is the most important thing. It's not your modality or the skill that you might use, it's that relationship within the room. So it's nice to see that coming front and center. And the focus is less on, am I following the rules? And this maybe echoes what you may have said, Rory, and it's more, am I working ethically with this person in this context? Now that is really important because it's kind of in this context means it's not a one size fits all. And we've spoken about neurodivergence on this podcast before, and so many differences that we've spoken about that we recognize and embrace. And it seems that the framework is really making allowance for that. And if I was to give 3 points on this of the overall structure, so the 2018 framework was a commitment to clients. It was ethics, which were the values, principles, and the personal moral qualities that we should aspire to. And then it was about good practice. And in the new proposed framework, working ethically within relationships, as opposed to commitment with clients. It's the same, but it seems to have expanded on. Instead of ethics, values, principles, and personal moral qualities, it's been boiled down into ethical principles. And instead of good practice, core responsibilities. So hopefully you may find it simpler, clearer, and more reflective as a practitioner, and dare I say, maybe easier to use. But that's a very broad stroke that I've put on that, Rory. There's a lot more nuance, and it does go a lot deeper.
Yeah, it does, Ken. And, I think one of the overall themes of the framework is anti-oppressive practice. It talks about not being oppressive and using power in a way that would, disadvantage clients. And also, I think it empowers practitioners' judgment. I say we. I'm not a member of the BACP, but for those members who follow this, it really empowers more practical judgment and reasoning. For me, there's a bigger focus on getting practitioners to think about their practice, to think ethically about their practice, and to use supervision and any other tools to keep them thinking, keep them reflecting. There's a bigger focus on reflection, I think, in this framework than there has been before, and greater accountability, definitely greater accountability. And also, one of the things I welcome, it uses simpler language. When I started, the framework I started with when I was a student, they talked about fidelity. The only time I'd heard about fidelity was in hi-fi, Ken. So I was lucky that I could be able to say it must mean clarity. And now they've reduced not reduced, but they've made it really, really clear. Being trustworthy is now trust. Autonomy is now respect. Beneficence is best interest. Non-maleficence is doing no harm. It's real clear language. And also justice has been repaired with fairness. And I think that to use the shift of language for me is really important because it produces a balance and a clarity which maybe the 2018 framework lacked.
Yeah. And, if you listen to the podcast regularly, you know that Rory and I taught alongside each other, and Rory has many, many, many years as a counselling tutor. And one of the reasons we started Counselling Tutor in the first place was to help clients who maybe didn't have the academic language to be able to, well, what Rory did, what you do so well, Rory, is you take the complex theory and you put it into easy to understand information. You take it away from this big words. And I think that is now what you've mentioned in terms of how the wording has changed in the framework. It is no longer using highfalutin academic words. It's making it understandable. When you see non-maleficence, I might need to go to a dictionary. I don't, because I learned it within my counselling studies, but I needed to learn what it meant. Do no harm means it's a lot easier to understand. So I welcome the change in the language. I think it's more inclusive, and I'm glad to see that. What's new or different? AI and digital ethics, and you've mentioned this, Rory, as we came in. We've got a very good reason why we now need to look at AI and digital ethics. AI, not a massive amount said about AI, and I'll come to that in a little bit. But what the BACP have clearly done is left a door open to be able to build and explore that area, I guess, as we learn more. And more tools become available. So they've kind of put their stake in the ground and said, we are going to definitely be looking and serving in this area. But digital ethics, there's quite a change in terms of digital ethics, which I'd like to go on to in just a moment. And that is, like you say, Rory, things have changed. Technology has really leaped forward. So data protection and privacy is a whole different world now. And we've always said on this podcast, things like UK GDPR and the Data Protection Act, they're not things that are nice to know about. They are things we have to do. And I'm really happy to see that that has now been well and truly baked into the update of the 2025 update from the BACP. So it's under core responsibilities, really, is where data protection and privacy stand. Now, there was always a 3.1, which is protect the confidentiality and privacy of those accessing our services. To achieve this, we must respect people's rights to privacy, uphold duty to keep information shared confidential, stored securely. And this is interesting. This is the important one here. It's this B that's been put in. So it's 3.1B. It is comply with data protection requirements of the country where the record is stored. Now that is really important. Where the record is stored. Now, why am I really emphasizing that? I'm emphasizing it because if you were using third-party services to store your notes and your records, you need to now be looking at where that data is actually stored. You can be buying a product or service in the UK, a digital product or service that you think is compliant because you're buying it within the UK, but it may be that their data is stored offshore. Now, we are bound by this ethical framework to respect the laws of where that data is stored. So that's an interesting one for me, Rory. I think that is going to, I think that's probably a week's worth of podcasts all on its own.
Yes, absolutely. I think it just reflects the modern practitioner in that, we're using tools, we're using online work, and I think it's taken a little bit for the profession to catch up. And I say that by the comments and the questions asked in our Facebook group. If you want to know where our Facebook group is, just go to Facebook, Counselling Tutor. You'll find us and see for yourself the type of questions that practitioners are posting about, one of which is, do I have to join the Information Commissioner's Office, the ICO? Do I have to register? Well, I think the answer to that's answered in this. The answer is if you're storing client data, the answer is yes. There's no riddle room. But also making people think really clearly about the tools they're using. There's a plethora of tools out there, AI-driven tools, whether it's to store your notes or the things for assessment. But really, you're going to have to ethically source or ethically look at where that data is stored. If you are putting any data in for a client or you're sending information and they're storing the client's email address, where is it stored? And it has to be stored. You have to, as Ken said, obey the law of the area that you are storing the data in. So, if you are based in the UK, really, you should be thinking about storing the data in UK servers of organisations that store in the UK, because we have UK GDPR now. So I do think it's going to be a piece of work for some practitioners to do, because something I think sometimes we take it. We something perhaps we don't focus on. We're interested in the work. We're interested in clients and the relationship. But now we're going to have to look at that detail, Ken.
Oh, very, very much so. There's a lot to cover. I think, as said, we've just picked on a few topics here, Rory. Rory has gone ahead and made a super duper handout, and it does a comparison. It compares and contrasts. It's a document that kind of lays out what we see in 2018 and what the proposed 2025 draft is saying for us. And you can see the similarities and you can see the differences within that. So you can download that super duper handout, and I suggest that you do. Just go to Counselling Tutor counsellingutor.com. That's our website. This is free. You don't pay for it. You can just download it. Go to click on the podcast tab and go to episode 354, and right there on the page is the link. You just click on that and we'll send you that download, and then you can have a look for yourself. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, Rory, the consultation period may have closed. Am I understanding that? Or I'm a little bit woolly on that because my ethical body is different. So I don't know if that window has closed. I seem to think it did in July. If I'm not mistaken.
I think it's worth going to. If you're a member of the BACP, I think it's really worth you going to the website, looking up the document. They'll have all the documents there, and having a really good look at it. The way I saw it, Ken, was that it was still a consultation document. It was still a draft document. They were going to launch it in the 2026. So we are going to put some links into the page. So please go to the podcast page and make sure that you find the links, and you'll be able to see and speak to the BACP if you're unsure. But I think every practitioner who's a BACP member should really be looking at this, because this is what's coming. And I also think it will reflect widely in all the other ethical bodies. The BACP is one professional body that we have in the UK. There are a number of others: NCPS, a UKCP, Association of Christian Counsellors, Human Givens, just four that I can recite from the top of my head. And I think we'll find that the kind of tone of the BACP Ethical Framework may very well be a tone that's adopted in all codes of practices, because the world has moved on. But very exciting, Ken. It shows that our profession is a vibrant, developing profession, and one that is serving the needs of the general public, of whom we are in service of.
Oh, very much so. And I say watch this space. I have absolutely no doubt that this new framework, when launched, will have a build-out ability. In this day and age, as technology is changing so fast, we need those. And you can very clearly see that the BACP is leaving a door open to build in information around AI as that comes available. And when we were mentioning about the data protection and the laws of the country that the data is stored, this is not just related to AI. It is the storage of any client's data. If you keep it in an online storage or something like that, just check where the servers are based on that, and usually they will tell you on their site. So it's new things, I guess, for us to work out and look at. But my overall feeling, I guess, as we leave this, is I think it's definitely better wording. Easier for me to understand in the wording. I love, and I really mean love this, that relationship is seen as the center and is seen as key, because that's what it's all about, isn't it? And the AI part of things, they can't replace that human at the center relationship. So that's reassuring to me. I feel protected in that. And, these frameworks, they're there to protect us, to protect our practices and protect our clients, and to keep counseling in good standing, and I think it's doing a good job of that. What are your takeaway feelings, Rory, as we kind of close out of this topic?
I think that it will give the public reassurance. I think the public are becoming a bit more savvy now on or informing themselves a little bit more about what the world of counselling and psychotherapy is, what they're buying into effectively. So I think that the public are becoming more educated. And I think all of the ethical bodies, and in particular the BACP, needs to be congratulated on that, because they have done a really good job at being public facing. I think it protects the public. It'll protect the public a lot better, because the clarity of the framework gives no room for interpretation. You look at it and you say, That's really, really clear. And one final observation is the BACP are very, very good at making fact sheets that go along with policies that they've developed. So to speak to your observation about it being future-proofed and modular, I think there'll be fact sheets. So a fact sheet will give more detail into each of these. And I think the fact sheets will be informed by the amount of complaints that they get. The BACP have made it really clear that one of the things that's informed the framework is the amount of complaints they've received from the general public, and that has informed it. So I think there'll be fact sheets. So my big takeaway is a welcome update, and also I think if you are a member of the BACP, go in, have a look at it, speak to the BACP. Also, remember that these frameworks are living documents; they're not etched in stone, and by that I mean that there will be advice and information and fact sheets that the BACP, I'm presuming, will generate. And it's up to you to keep up to date with that, keep visiting, keep opening emails from the BACP who are saying there's been an update or a fact sheet, a good practice document. And you'll keep on the right side of things and offer, which I'm sure those who listen are, a really fantastic service to the general public.
Of course. And just as we're back out of this, you said some important words, Roy, and it's your responsibility to go and look at these documents, read what the BACP has to say, look at the emails from the BACP. Remember, disclaimer here, Rory and I are two colleagues looking at this and having a discussion about it. We're just talking about it. This is not, what we say is not bankable. Go and look for yourself. It is your ethical framework if you're working to this, and see how it resonates with you. And if you're unsure of anything, you can ask the BACP to clarify that. There it is, isn't it, Rory? That is our ethical sustainable practice, the draft BACP 2025 ethical framework. And we've had a closer look at that. And remember, if you want to get that compare and contrast, counselingtutor.com, click on the podcast tab, episode 354. You can download it there, and it's all laid out for you, thanks to Rory. And now we move straight into Practice Matters, the CPD section of the Counselling Tutor podcast. I always enjoy hearing about modalities that are not my own, Rory, and today is one of those opportunities. I'm very grateful to have studied REBT during my studies as a comparative model to person-centered and transactional analysis, and it's an interesting model. And you met up with Ruth Hill to discuss this in more detail, Rory.
I did, and this is a double-header interview. So if you're a member of our CSR library, if you're a student and you're a member of our library, this lecture is going in there. So if you're doing a compare and contrast, as Ken has just alluded to, go in there and have a look at that. And the definitions are going to be really clear, really help you if you're doing compare and contrast. If you're a qualified colleague, I think Ruth gives a very clear overview on what REBT is and how it can be used in a relational way. So it's definitely well worth watching. I caught up with Ruth, and she told us about her lecture, and she told us this.
Practice Matters is proudly sponsored by the Counsellor CPD Library. To access top quality, relevant continuing professional development for your practice that you can do at a time that suits you, and all for less than the price of a cup of coffee, visit counselingtutor.com.
If you've ever wondered how to help clients build emotional resilience rather than avoid complicated feelings, or how to work more effectively with the beliefs that sit beneath emotional distress, this conversation should be interesting. Joining us today to talk about her lecture for the Counsellor CPD and CSR libraries titled REBT Clear Definitions, I'm delighted to welcome back returning lecturer Ruth Hill, who's an integrative REBT therapist with a background in sports science, psychology, and lots of practice. So welcome, Ruth. Welcome back.
Hi, Rory. Thanks for having me back.
Yes. So I had a look at the lecture, which is really, really fantastic. You know, if you're interested in REBT, or, you know, maybe a bit curious about how it works as a contrast to the therapy that you're using now. And you start the lecture by defining REBT and placing it in its historic context. Could you share what drew you to REBT as a modality and why you think it remains so relevant to counselling practice today?
What drew me to REBT was the simplicity. There's an elegant simplicity to, we're not disturbed by things, we're disturbed by our beliefs about those things. Now, when you get into the meat of the lecture and I'm going through my ABCDEs of REBT, it might sound kind of complicated and fussy, but it will always get you back on track. We're not disturbed by things, we're disturbed by our beliefs about those things.
Yes, and I think that's a very useful start. And I think, if I'm right, that might be Epictetus. Is it the philosopher Epictetus, or is
Epictetus?
Epictetus. That's why, yes. I never studied philosophy. And Epictetus, and it's a really interesting position, isn't it? That you know, if you think about it, there are things that may, you know, you may feel uncomfortable about things, but it's our perception of it, not always the reality. And I think that's really interesting. And in the lecture, you talk about, you know, the general and specific principles of emotional responsibility, which I actually found quite refreshing, and challenging the idea that this makes me feel. To, you know, how do you explain the concept to clients in a way that's both accessible and empowering? So people often say, you know, this is how this makes me feel. And I think sometimes it's useful just to explore what it is that's underlying that feeling. And, you know, the fact that, you know, no one can make you feel something. You feel it for yourself.
Exactly. And that's these two in a nutshell. The general principle of emotional responsibility is that everyone, all of us, we're responsible for our emotions. We're responsible if we feel angry, if we feel sad. Those are our emotions. And the specific principles of emotional responsibility are around our personal beliefs. So if we have a rigid belief about something, that's up to us. That's like, for example, cyclists going through red lights. If I have a very strong belief that they mustn't do it, I'm going to stand by the side of the road, watching them go through the lights, feeling fury and thinking that the cyclists are making me furious. And they're not. It's my unhealthy belief about what other people do that's triggering the anger.
Yes.
So I turn that into a healthy belief of, well, I'd prefer they didn't jump red lights, but I accept that they do.
Yes. Yes.
So the acceptance means I'm standing there watching them doing it, and that there's no cognitive dissonance there. I'm seeing something and believing the same thing.
Oh, that's interesting. So you speak about cognitive dissonance, one of my favourite subjects. And I've always believed that cognitive dissonance was kind of a fear of the truth about things, when people would rather believe in one thing than actually experience the discomfort of the real truth of the matter. And, you know, I think that is that a real fundamental underpin for REBT, that people, rather people feel uncomfortable, they kind of project their views outward rather than actually address them.
I guess, there's truth in that. But, you know, we also do it in a very compassionate way. It's not a sort of gotcha. So giving a presentation, a client might strongly believe that they can't do it. They're too anxious, they can't do it. So how can they do any work around working on their presentation when they actually believe they can't? So it's not about changing the reality around them. If you can go back and find that core belief and break down the old unhealthy one and build up the new healthy one, then you've taken away that sort of asymmetric thinking of I can't, well, what can I do to do it? Because there's nothing you can do to do it if you believe you can't.
Yeah. See, I might be surprising to some of the listeners, but I like this idea. I mean, I've warmed to it more as the years have gone on. And, you know, this idea of there may be an activating event, something happens in your life that gives you a view of the world. But actually, that might not be an accurate view. I'll give you an example. Recently, we were in the park with my granddaughter. She's 5. And she was at the swings and Mum was a bit further away and she was shouting Mum to look at her on the swing. And she said, Mum isn't listening to me. Mum's not listening to me. And I just said to her, Izzy, what else could be true? And she said, maybe Mum's too far away to hear me. And I said, right. I said, so if that's the case, I said, what's it most likely to be? And she said, well, probably she's too far away. I said, so what would you need to do to be heard? She said, well, I'll have to get off the swing and run to her. So I guess I practiced a bit of REBT there then, did I?
Absolutely. And I'm sure plenty of my clients will recognise the obviously it's a CBT type therapy, will recognise worksheets which go from the facts through assumptions and inferences through to evaluations. And I use the example of them walking into a room and seeing someone with their back. Well, that would be the facts are this person has their back turned to me. That's it. Those are the only facts you have. But being humans, we start to make assumptions. They've got their back turned because they don't want to talk to me. And then we start to make inferences. They've got their back turned because they don't want to talk to me because they don't like me. And then we make evaluations about back turned, don't want to talk to me, don't like me. They're never going to talk to me again. And I'm not going to ever have any friends. It's rarely as simple as that. But I don't know, after the granddaughter example, maybe it is as simple as that. And we go through that effortlessly without thinking. We go from seeing a fact to making a fully formed evaluation of ourselves, the world and other people without breaking stride.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking in terms of the model, there was an activating event in that my granddaughter wasn't being heard by Mum. There was a belief formed by that, which was Mum isn't listening. The consequence of that was my granddaughter was getting a little bit upset. And what I did is I went to the D, I disputed the belief by asking her what else could be true.
Yep.
And once we disputed the belief, then she moved into a different form of thinking. She said, well, this could be true. And I said, well, if that is, and then we moved on to, I guess, actions, you know. So if we believe that might be true as well, what could we do if she can't hear you? And the move on from that was, well, I'll just have to get a bit nearer. And she got off the swing and round, and that moment was gone forever. But I just thought, as you were talking about, you know, the foundations of REBT, I thought that might be a useful example. But
it's a good example because you're also talking about taking it from an intellectual understanding to integration, which is something we do. We make that very clear that you can understand it. And I use the example of when I worked as a personal trainer. If I had someone for an hour a week, I could sit them down and explain how muscles grow and what's the best way of picking up weights. They've got the intellectual understanding. But if they go away and the rest of the week they don't do anything, we're going to meet again a week later and nothing will have changed. So intellectual understanding is great, but it doesn't shift anything. So it's the E of the REBT, ABCDE, the change, the emotional change.
Yes. I think that is really, really helpful. And I like the idea of emotional responsibility. The idea is that we are responsible for our emotions,
Yep.
and that we should be having those conversations with ourselves about what is it. So, I mean, I guess that brings me on to healthy and unhealthy emotions. I guess one of the strengths of our REBT is there's a clear distinction between healthy and unhealthy emotions. So how would you as a practitioner help clients recognise the shift from one to the other, especially things like anxiety, anger, or feeling overwhelmed?
We explain both of them. In the context we use is it's the coin isn't positive emotions on one side and negative emotions on the other. That's not our coin here. Our coin is healthy negative emotions, unhealthy negative emotions. That's your choice, because we're saying that bad things or sad things or upsetting things will happen. There will be negative emotions. But if you can start to split them out and differentiate between the healthy and the unhealthy ones, then that's making a start in shifting your mood. And we give definitions so that it's a sort of meta process. By giving those definitions, we're asking our clients to start to think about or to write down or to record what's actually happening. So we're getting them to observe their emotions. And once you start observing something, well, that's when you're starting to build the possibility of change. And if you can get someone to name their emotions, well, that triggers something that starts to trigger a change too. And then you give them the option of the healthy version. So it's saying it's okay to feel sad about this. It's okay to feel a healthy anger or annoyance about this, because these things are sad or upsetting. But it's the healthy version will mean that you're not in a state of fight or flight, because you can't think then and you can't get yourself out of the situation. But if we can get you to deal with this upsetting or sad situation in rest and repair, then you're going to cope with it better.
Yes. And I think that's a very interesting part of this model, in the idea that, you know, there is a separation between thinking and feeling. That's why we have two words for it, I guess. And if you can, if you're in a difficult situation, you can think about what emotion you're having and what does it really mean. And I'll give you another example. I'm going to be using my granddaughter as a case study, I think, a lot in the near future. My granddaughter was saying she was a bit frightened of going to Disneyland. And I said, well, the thing is, Izzy, that fear, anxiety, feeling fearful and feeling excited are the same emotion. I said, it's just a case of where your thinking is. And she went away, because she's quite a little philosophical soul, is Izzy. And she came back, she said, I think I'm excited, Grandad. And I said, right. So I said, well, how do you feel now? She said, it's going to be great. And I thought, it wouldn't be great if they taught this in parenting classes or taught this in schools. And she went, and it was instantaneous change. I'm not saying it will be that easy in clients, but yeah, I think that's the thing that disputing, disputing the change. So I mean, I think for me in the lecture, the section on disputing questions really stood out. So could you talk us through how you would use disputing in a session to support clients' skill outside the therapy room?
Well, disputing will come when we've worked together to find the unhealthy belief that's propping up the unwanted emotions, the unhealthy negative emotions. So we've got our unhealthy belief. And then we'll look for the derivatives of that. So is the client saying, this is the worst thing in the world imaginable?
Yes.
Is this unbearable? And what does this mean about me? Because not every unhealthy belief will have all three derivatives. It might have one, it might have two. It just entirely depends on the client. So once we've got those, then we work together to build the healthy belief, which is always a preference. The unhealthy one will always be a demand. The healthy one will always be a preference. So we're taking the must out of it and we're putting an acceptance in. So I must be able to give a perfect presentation. Well, that's not going to happen. And you're going to be triggered if your presentation isn't perfect. So we'd swap that to, I'd like to give a perfect presentation, but I accept I might not. So we've put reality into it. So to dispute that, and I do explain a lot of, we don't just barge through this stuff. This is done with the client understanding what we're doing and why we're doing it. There's no, we're doing this for mysterious reasons. Everything's very clear and explained. So the process would be explained. We're going to go through these questions together. Are you okay with that? And we would explain that, look, this might feel really repetitive because it is, because you've been telling yourself the unhealthy versions for years. So now we've really got to repeat and repeat the healthy version. So we split our questions up into empirical, so where's the evidence? Logical, does it follow? And pragmatic, how does this help me? And we do that for the demand of the unhealthy version, plus any derivatives. And then the important bit is we do it exactly the same intensity for the healthy version. So we're breaking down the unhealthy version. We're not just saying the healthy version, look, this is great, it works. We do the same disputing so that it gives a sort of confidence in the client knows that this new healthy belief is actually, it is realistic and flexible and helpful. This is something that's going to be useful for me to think.
Yeah, and I think you gave a really good example about the perfect presentation. It has to be perfect, and just disputing it by saying, well, nothing is perfect. Or
it can't be.
Not anything is perfect. I think you can't.
Yep.
Better careful with grammar here, or I'll get letters. And not everything can be perfect, but you could do it to the best of your ability. And hey, everybody, everybody isn't perfect. There's very few people who are perfect, and if they are, they're not perfect all the time. And get people into thinking that, and then that is a way of challenging, isn't it, or disputing? No,
absolutely.
Yeah, and I guess part of this, because this is a very kind of active directive therapy, it's a taught model, isn't it, where you hope that I guess you're hoping that the client will take away what they've learned and then practice it outside the therapy room.
Oh, that's one of the things that I think once I got to know about it really helped me fall in love with REBT. It's not hook a client and hang on to them. We're trying to help. I mean, imagine a world in which everyone has emotional regulation. Who wouldn't want to be a part of that? So we're trying to. It's almost like, I think, learning a foreign language. You learn a couple of the words and the phrases, and the grammar's beyond you for a while. And that's what happens at the beginning of REBT. You learn a little bit about it, and then you start to put it together. And you practice and practice and practice, and then all of a sudden you can do it without breaking stride. You can be walking along, feel something. Well, what is this? What am I feeling? What's happening? What am I telling myself? What could the belief be? Tiny bit of disputing. You've got your healthy belief, and you can. The plan is to teach people so that they can do this themselves. They can be their own REBT therapist.
Yeah. They can ask the questions, as I asked Izzy. What else could be true?
Well, you're teaching her REBT, so imagine the first time she comes back to you and tells you that she's rethought something or she's praised something. Yeah.
It's an interesting. It's a really interesting therapy. And I used to teach it as a comparative therapy when I taught. I taught person-centered as the main modality, but a comparative therapy. And I was surprised how many people were drawn to it. So I'm just aware of the time, but finally, what do you hope that people will take away from your lecture?
There are a couple of different things. I think, obviously, I'm hoping that some people will say, this is for me, because people might already be doing something fairly similar. We're all trying to find clients' beliefs and to help them find the healthiest version. So people might be already intuitively doing something similar, and maybe they can go and do the training so that we can have lots and lots of REBT therapists. And I think, secondly, it's a useful process to know about. And the more you know about it, I mean, if you're a therapist, you're going to know how these things work. Can you use it for yourself? Is there anything that's causing you discomfort that you think you might be able to go through the process yourself?
Yes. Yeah. Handy for parents and grandparents, I think, as well.
Absolutely. Why not teach children?
Yeah. REBT Clear Definitions, a lecture by Ruth Hill, is available in the CSR and CPD libraries. And it just goes for me to say, Ruth Hill, thank you so much for joining us again.
Massive thank you to Ruth Hill. Massive thank you to you, Rory, for holding those all-important discussions. And that is today's Practice Matters. We now move right into Student Services. Student Services is sponsored by Counselling Skills Academy. Can't tell you how many times Rory and I have heard counselling students say that learning skills and knowing that they're using them effectively is really, really challenging. The reason for this is because we don't get to see another counsellor using skills in a real live session. In reality, this means that we're asked to learn something that we can never see demonstrated in a real setting. And it's no wonder that many of us are left feeling unsure. If you want to see counselling skills used in real sessions by qualified therapists, so this is real sessions, real presentations, and real use of skills, then go to counselingskillsacademy.com. There's some free videos on skills, including a full live session that you can have a look at. Gain the competence and the confidence of knowing you're using your counselling skills effectively. Just visit counselingskillsacademy.com. And today in Student Services, we're speaking about navigating personal triggers in counselling training. Describe what that is, Rory. So you're a student, you're busy doing your counselling training. What is a trigger and how does it show up? How might I feel it?
Well, I think when we use the word trigger, what we really mean is something that puts us into a panic or alarm state or a fear state, or takes us through transference back into the past. And I'll give you an example of that. I can still remember my first day at school as a 5-year-old, clearly, and I went back to train as a counsellor and went back to my class. And I was sitting there and I was struggling not to think of myself as that 5-year-old in the classroom, that lost little boy in the classroom. And that's a trigger. And it brought all the anxiety, all the fear, all the flight and fight. And it took me everything I had to kind of hold on to my seat and not run out, which I have to say I've done on a couple of occasions before I went back to training. And there's a couple of classes that I turned up to and then just disappeared. And that's a trigger, and it can be triggers, and I don't want to trigger anybody who's listening to this, but I think we have to discuss the kind of things. It can be talking about very difficult material that may be in there's a case discussion in a practice class where people are practicing. They talk about something that's happened to a client, and that has happened to one of the students, and they get triggered. I even had a student many years ago who had had a very difficult past, very, very difficult past, and she was frightened of a particular aftershave, shall we say, because her abuser wore that aftershave. And it became an ongoing theme as she said, what happens if someone comes in wearing that aftershave? So because it would trigger them, and a trigger is where your brain takes you back to a time when you were in danger. or felt in danger. That's what a trigger is, Ken. And it does happen. People do get triggered.
Yeah. And it's difficult for us to say where that triggering might come from, because it can come from the most unexpected of places. It really can. As in everyday life, a trigger can kind of just surprise you. So some of the places that it kind of might show itself is, as you said, Rory, it may be looking back at how your past life was, and you speak about your education was the same for me. That was very triggering for me, specifically if I had to handwrite anything down. It was horrible. It was really difficult for me to do. But it might be something that someone else says, and it might not even be counselling related. It might be somebody else on your course who rubs you up the wrong way, and it triggers an anger feeling in you, and you kind of, I don't know what it is, but and it might be the tutor. The tutor might trigger you. It can be a number of different things, and what we're not here to do today is discuss what might trigger you. We're talking about what do you do and how do you manage this, and how can you look after yourself within that situation. And the first thing is to acknowledge that trigger. So what do I mean by that? And a trigger will come in as an emotionally charged piece of information. It may come from another person. As it hits your ears, their words bring something up. And also, in the case that you were speaking about, Rory, it may be a scent, it may be a sound, it may be an action, but something triggers, and you're immediately hit with this really emotionally charged energy. You feel it straight away. And what can happen within a trigger, and you've kind of alluded to this, Rory, is you can leave the here and now and be back thinking about that thing, that time, that person, that whatever it may have been. You're not in the present moment. It almost transports you away into an emotional state where you may be remembering or rethinking of something that is not happening here right now within this room. And the first step to working with that is acknowledging it and going, I saw it. Because it can be really sneaky. You can find yourself only realizing that you've been triggered a few minutes later when you already caught up in it. It can be kind of a not seen, as it were. You find yourself acting out or having the emotions related to this. If you can pick up as it comes in and go, oh, right, I see that triggers me. Being triggered is not a weakness. There's not something wrong with you. It's not something bad. It's something not to be ignored. If you can acknowledge that, and specifically as counselors, psychotherapists, we want to be acknowledging the type of things that trigger us, because that invites opportunity for us to work with it. If we can say afterwards, that was interesting. When that person said that, I felt this anger rising up in me. And it's very easy to go, they shouldn't say things like that. They shouldn't have done that. That's getting caught up in the narrative of it. What we can do is acknowledge that when that person said that, it made this feeling inside me. And I think that's step one, Rory, is acknowledging that, because then you can share it with the supervisor or take it to another step. What's your thinking around that, Rory?
Yeah, I think you've hit on a very powerful point. No one can make you feel anything. You feel it yourself. And although someone might say something, and you say you've made me feel uncomfortable, my view would be that actually you've made yourself feel, your history has made yourself feel uncomfortable. And if that's the case, if there's something that comes up, if you're in supervised practice, you could talk about that in supervision. The supervisor may hold a boundary there, because supervision isn't, as we know, personal therapy, but in the kind of normative part of supervision, formative, restorative part of supervision, had to go through the triangle there. There can be a supportive aspect in supervision. I'd certainly support someone who was saying that they felt triggered by a client or felt triggered in a class. I'd be kind of helping them explore that. But I think it's also important to frame it as a reflection, not a confessional. This is part of professional growth. as therapists, as I said yesterday to a group of students, we do put ourselves in harm's way as therapists. We put ourselves in front of people who may have been the type of people who had an adverse effect on us in the past. And as such, part of developing as a therapist is that professional growth and developing that robust side to you. And I think that moves on, Ken, to, if it continues, or it's a ongoing theme, seeking personal therapy, going to personal therapy. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, Ken.
Yeah, it's we speak about this quite a lot as well, don't we, in terms of why we go into personal therapy, and this is one of those many examples of why it serves clients. If you're in a session with a client and you're triggered by material or something that comes up, are you there? Are you able to be fully there with that client? And by going to personal therapy, we can get to work through some of the things that trigger us. And I'm going to go back to being triggered is not a bad thing. It's not a weakness. It's not that if I was stronger of mind, then I wouldn't be triggered by that. It's natural. It's a natural process that I think all of us can kind of relate to at some level. And some triggers are more powerful than others. Some emotions are more powerful than others, but it's part of being human. So taking that to another counsellor and sharing that with another counsellor can shine some light on it. So we've said now, personal therapy, we've said supervision, but I think that let's pay attention now to in the moment. I'm sat now, I'm in professional discussion, somebody says something, this really brings up something within me, and suddenly I know I've been triggered and I've got all of these emotions. What do I do? Because I'm in that moment. And what you can do is ground yourself. Remember, we started off by saying that trigger may well take you out of the here and now. You're no longer in the room sat in a circle with your colleagues having a professional discussion. You're in a memory of something that may have happened, or experiencing a very strong emotion that kind of removes you or distances you from the here and now moment. As soon as you are able to recognize that, you have an ability to do something about it, and you can use a grounding technique. There are many grounding techniques. It's often, as counselors, we may even share grounding techniques with our clients when it is appropriate to do so. And a grounding technique is really there to bring you into the here and now. It stops you thinking. You recognize it. You say, right, I'm going to stop thinking about that and I'm going to do something actively right now. And it can be 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 sensory grounding. Tell me about how that works. How do you do a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 grounding, Rory?
Well, I think you can, the way I would use it, people use it in different ways, is about breathing, sensory focus and mindfulness. And how that works is you might look at, 5 things you can see in the room, 4 things you can hear, 3 things you can touch, 2 things that you can look at, even your own internal dialogue. You can address that. You can challenge your own internal dialogue. I've spent many times in professional meetings saying, "You're 42, Rory. You're not 5." And I think that was real. That's really helpful. I spent a lot of time having that conversation when I was training. If I was getting particularly stressed, I trained my mind to have this little voice that's saying, "Rory, you're 42. You're not 5. This isn't school. This isn't the past. This is something else. And what you're hearing is what you're feeling is an echo of the past that's gone." And I personally found that very helpful. I understand, and please don't misunderstand me, that it is not as easy for people who've been in very traumatics. I really do get that, but I think just finding your own way of staying in the here and now is so important. And a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 grounding, tapping your foot, tapping your hand, just to get that top brain activated, so you don't fall into your emotional brain and become fight, fear, or flop. You're still in that cognitive space. So finding your own technique. And I would say, Ken, that in cases when we've taught, and someone's having a bit of a bad day, students having a bit of a bad day, they've said, is there any chance I can just go for a walk round? And we've said, yeah, I can think of that on a couple of occasions where people have said, do you mind if I just go for a walk? And say, no, off you go for a walk round, just make sure you're okay. Come back and see us when you're all right. And I was told that was immensely helpful, that someone could physically take themselves out of the situation, because as we know with trauma, part of the trauma is sometimes you cannot remove yourself from the situation. So yeah. I think you have to take it on yourself. I also think your tutor should be attuned to what might be going on. I think a good tutor will understand, a wise tutor will see what's going on and say, look, why don't you take a break, go and get yourself a coffee and have a chat. But that's a grounding technique. 5 things you can see, 4 things you can hear, 3 things you can touch. Yeah.
And that is what you said. You gave away the key there. The actual gold of that is the frontal cortex is the part of our brain, it's the modern brain, where we think and we reason and we have control. But there are parts of our brain that we don't really have control over. It just kind of feels like it's just happening to us. And when we activate what we can control, and that's in a grounding a grounding technique, as you've suggested there. If I'm going, okay, I'm feeling all of this, I recognize I'm feeling it, because that's step 1, is just recognizing that's happening to me. I'm going to look around the room and I'm going to find 5 things and name 5 things I can see. Now I'm engaging my frontal cortex, which means my brain has got a job to do, and it may take the attention away from what I was feeling and where I felt I was being hijacked and just taken along. I'm now in control. I'm thinking this. I'm now looking for 4 things I can hear in the room. I can hear that chair when they move. I can hear the traffic outside. And just by doing that, engaging the brain, engaging the senses, pulling oneself into the here and now, it is useful. That is a mindful practice. And of course, reflect and record. When we're studying, we're called on to keep a journal. This is the place. This is the place for all of that. Because the truth is, triggers are growth opportunities. They may be unpleasant, they may be horrible, but there's always an element of growth. And by reflecting, recording, and of course you need to feel safe in that, and you need to know when you can manage this and reflect and record, and when you might need to go and seek professional help with your own personal therapy. If you can't get out of the depths of it, you do need to speak to a fellow professional on that line. But where you can, reflecting, recording, writing it down. This is what came up for me. I was in personal development group, and that person, they were hogging all the time, and I didn't get the chance to say the thing that I wanted to, and that person makes me so angry, and ooh, there I go. I've just been hijacked and been taken on that little train. I can now sit down afterwards and go, what's that? What is that? What's it about? Who does that person remind me of? What were those feelings that came up inside me? Because by understanding, we're shining a light on it. And within that light, we may find that we start to have understanding, to be able to manage triggers, I guess, in a easier way for ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is one of the benefits of working in a group, doing in the room training when you're doing your first trainings, is that you've got a whole cohort of people you can lean into and support you, and also, if necessary, speak with your tutor. I've had a lot of conversations with students through the years who are very worried about if they could become therapists, because they had triggers of what I would say would everyday things. Aftershave or cologne is a thing that is used every day for some men, And I totally understand it if a perpetrator, if it reminds someone of a perpetrator. But by speaking with tutors, you could get reassurance, you can get maybe something to help you. And I have to say that the student I was thinking of, who went for walks, who, was very worried about cologne, became a very, very competent therapist, still practicing, working with incredibly difficult material, with clients who bring incredibly difficult personal material, and is at the top of her game. She's at the top of her game in terms of being a really competent practitioner. And, it was a journey for her. It's something that needs to be worked through. And I think that what she did was she reframed triggers as opportunities for growth. So she saw what was happening, understood the context of it, which is something that maybe takes some time. Why do I feel like this? And then think, it's because of. And she reframed it as opportunities for growth and did a lot of self-reflection and became more curious of her triggers than shamed by them. And I think with that in mind, I think that's the kind of tale that maybe a lot of people can take on. It's certainly one I took on in terms of my particular trigger. That, as I say to myself, you're not 5, I'm 68 now.
Yeah. Oh, very, very much so. And, counseling, psychotherapy, it's about empathy. It really is about understanding the human condition. And how do we understand it? Well, we understand it from our own frame of reference, from what we've been through and what we've experienced and where we have experienced growth and the painful things that we have faced in order to be there for others. And I think that the example you just used there, Rory, is a gleaming, shining example of how by looking at ourselves, we can better be there in service of others. Counseling training, as we've often said, is unlike so many other trainings because we're not just learning the theory, we're not just writing the assignments or doing the exams. We are learning about and dealing with ourselves as well. And that's a big ask. So I salute anyone that is a student listening to this podcast and you're on your journey, because it's not easy. But here's the thing, the world needs you. The world needs kind, compassionate counselors who understand. And if you're one day with a client and they show that they have triggers, just think how accepting you can be when you know what that's really like. We started off speaking about the ethical sustainable practice, the draft BACP Ethical Framework, and how AI is weaving itself in. And one of the questions so often asked is, will AI eventually take over from counselors? And there'll be this bot online that you just pop in what's going on. It's going to tell you what to do. And it can't do that. And the reason it can't do that is because it doesn't do its own personal development and work on its own triggers, because it doesn't have them. It doesn't have true empathy. What a great topic, Rory. And I guess it's the topic that brings us to the end of episode 354 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast.
Yes, and we started off with ethical and sustainable practice. The breaking news, certainly as of October 2025, that the British Association of Counselling and Psychotherapy has released a draft framework. And if you're interested in that, you're a member of the BACP, you might want to go to counsellingtutor.com. You might want to go to a podcast tab, episode 354, where you're going to find a really good comparative handout with the 2018 framework, and also a whole host of links that will take you to the BACP. And I would encourage people, if you are a member of that particular professional body, to log into your member portal, have a look, speak to the BACP, speak to colleagues, because, by 2026, I think by the fourth quarter of 2026, this will be a working framework, and one that those who are members will have to abide by. Into practice matters, I interviewed Ruth Hill, who gave us a clear definitions of REBT, Rational Emotive Behavioural Therapy. very useful as a comparative information for those who are students doing compare and contrast in their studies, but equally as informative for those who are thinking about maybe taking a more cognitive approach in their practice. Very clear and very, very useful. And then in student services, we navigated we navigated personal triggers in training and gave some idea of how those can be managed. And I think we're very real about they happen a lot more than people would think. And finally, I'd like to thank you for your likes, subscribes, and shares. And until the next time, stay grounded and stay safe.
Take the stress out of your counselling studies and get the support of Rory and I by joining us in the Counselling Study Resource. Counselling Study Resource, or CSR for short, is the world's most comprehensive assignment guidance and study support resource for students just like you of counselling and psychotherapy. See how Counselling Study Resource can help you. Visit counsellingtutor.com. That's counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode by visiting counsellingtutor.com.